A little girl runs into the police station holding a baby. When she tells the officer why, he bursts into tears. The afternoon sun was sinking below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city streets. Inside the precinct, the usual hum of activity filled the air. Phones ringing, keyboards clattering, officers discussing cases. That routine was shattered when the front doors flew open with a loud bang. A little girl, no older than 10, stumbled inside, clutching a baby tightly to her chest. Her clothes were dirty and torn, her hair a tangled mess. Tears streamed down her cheeks, leaving streaks in the grime on her face. She moved with urgency, her small arms wrapped protectively around the infant. "Please," she cried, her voice breaking. "Help us." Officer Mark Evans, a tall, broad man with a kind face, was the first to react. He rose from his desk, his eyes narrowing as he took in the sight of the girl and the baby. He walked toward her, hands held out to show he meant no harm. "Hey, it's okay," he said gently. "You're safe here. Let's start by getting you both comfortable." The girl shook her head violently, backing away a step. Her grip on the baby tightened, and her small frame seemed to vibrate with tension. "No," she shouted. "Don't take him. He's my brother, and I have to protect him." Mark stopped in his tracks, his heart sinking. He crouched down, trying to make himself seem less imposing. His voice softened further. All right, he said. "You can hold him. I just want to help. What's your name?" The girl hesitated, her eyes darting around the room as if looking for an escape route. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Emily." "Okay, Emily," Mark said, nodding. "That's a beautiful name. And what about your brother? What's his name?" "Ethan," she whispered, her gaze dropping to the baby's sleeping face. Mark smiled gently. "Ethan looks like a strong little guy, just like his sister. Can you tell me why you're here, Emily?" Emily's lip quivered. She glanced over her shoulder at the doors, as though half expecting someone to burst in at any moment. "We ran away," she said finally, her voice trembling. "My stepdad, he hurts Ethan. I couldn't let him do it anymore." Mark's heart clenched. He'd seen a lot in his years on the force, but something about Emily's fierce determination and raw fear struck him deeply. He nodded to another officer. "Call Child Protective Services and get a medic here, just to check on the baby," he said quietly. The officer hurried off. Mark returned his focus to Emily. He pulled a chair from the side and gently guided her to sit down. "You're very brave, Emily," he said. "You did the right thing coming here. We're going to make sure Ethan is safe. And you too." Emily nodded, but she didn't relax. She kept her arms locked around Ethan as if afraid someone might snatch him away. Before Mark could ask more questions, the station doors swung open again. This time, a woman rushed in, her face pale and eyes wide with fear. Her disheveled appearance suggested she had been running. "Emily!" the woman cried, her voice cracking. "Oh my God, Emily!" Emily's body went rigid. Her wide, tear-filled eyes locked on the woman. "Mom," she whispered. The woman stumbled toward her, but Mark stepped in to intercept. "Ma'am, let's talk in private," he said firmly, gesturing toward an office. The woman hesitated, her eyes darting between Mark and Emily. She nodded quickly and followed him, her hands shaking. Inside the office, she sank into a chair, her head in her hands. "I didn't know she'd do this," she said, her voice muffled. "I was so scared when I found them gone." Mark sat across from her, his tone gentle but probing. "Mrs. Walker, your daughter says she ran away because your husband was hurting her brother. Is that true?" Tears streamed down her face as she nodded. "Yes, he's been violent for months. I wanted to leave, but he threatened us. He said he'd kill me if I ever told anyone." Mark's stomach turned. He leaned forward, speaking softly but urgently. "We're here to help you, but I need you to cooperate so we can protect your children." Mrs. Walker's eyes met his, filled with guilt and desperation. "I'll do whatever it takes," she whispered. Back in the waiting room, Emily sat silently with Ethan, her eyes fixed on the floor. She barely flinched when Mark returned. Emily, Mark said softly, kneeling beside her. Your mom's here. She wants to help you and Ethan. Emily's eyes flicked up, searching his face for any sign of deceit. She's still scared of him, she said. She won't leave. Mark sighed. It's hard to be brave sometimes, especially when you're afraid. But we're going to make sure you both are safe. Your stepdad won't hurt you again. Emily didn't respond. She just held Ethan tighter. Mark stood and walked to the door. He looked back at Emily, determined. You're not alone anymore, Emily. We'll protect you. As he stepped out, his resolve hardened. The fight for Emily and Ethan's safety was just beginning. The calm in the station was short-lived. Not long after Mark left Emily and Ethan in the quiet room, the front doors flew open again. This time, a man stormed in, his face flushed with anger. He was tall and broad, with a scruffy beard and wild eyes that darted around the room like a predator searching for prey. Where are they? He barked, slamming his fists onto the front desk. My kids. I know they're here. Officer Mark Evans, who had just stepped into the hallway, froze. He exchanged a glance with Officer Harris, who was manning the front desk. It didn't take long for Mark to put two and two together. He squared his shoulders and strode toward the man. Mr. Walker, I presume? Mark said, his voice steady but authoritative. The man turned sharply, his eyes narrowing. Yeah. Who the hell are you? I'm Officer Evans, Mark replied calmly. And you're in a police station, so I suggest you lower your voice. Walker's lips curled into a sneer, but he backed off the desk. Fine, he said, his voice a low growl. I'm here to take my kids home. They ran off and I want them back. Mark held his ground, his expression unreadable. We have reason to believe your children were in danger under your care, Mr. Walker. Walker's face twisted in fury. That's a damn lie, he spat. I'm their father. They belong with me. Mark could feel the tension in the room thickening. Other officers were watching, their hands hovering near their belts. But Mark didn't flinch. He kept his voice level, his gaze locked on Walker. Emily came to us because she was afraid for her brother's safety, Mark said. She claims you've been abusive. Walker scoffed, but there was a flicker of unease in his eyes. She's a kid. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Mark didn't budge. The authorities will decide that. For now, your children are under our protection. Walker leaned in, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You're making a big mistake, officer. You don't know who you're dealing with. Mark didn't blink. Actually, I do. You've got a record, Mr. Walker, assault and battery, violation of probation. We've already called Child Protective Services, and they'll be involved moving forward. Walker's bravado faltered for a split second before his rage returned. This isn't over, he snarled, his voice rising again. You can't keep my kids from me. Before he could make another move, Officer Harris stepped forward. Sir, you need to calm down, she said firmly, or we'll be forced to restrain you. Walker's eyes darted between the two officers, his chest heaving. But he didn't back down. Mark took a step closer, his voice colder now. You're already walking a fine line, Mr. Walker. Don't make it worse for yourself. Just then, another officer approached Mark and whispered something in his ear. Mark's expression darkened. He straightened and nodded. Mr. Walker, he said, his voice firm, you're under arrest for violating your probation and on suspicion of child endangerment. Walker's eyes widened in disbelief. What? He barked. You can't do this. Two officers moved in, grabbing his arms as he began to thrash. He shouted curses, his voice echoing through the station as they cuffed him. This is bullshit, Walker roared. You'll pay for this. Mark watched as they led him toward the holding cells, his jaw clenched. The man's threats didn't faze him. His focus was on ensuring Emily and Ethan wouldn't have to face that monster again. Meanwhile, in the quiet room, Emily flinched at the sound of Walker's shouting. She pressed Ethan closer, her small body trembling. The baby stirred but didn't wake, his tiny fist clutching her shirt. A few moments later, Mark walked back in, his expression softer now. He knelt beside Emily, his voice calm and reassuring. It's over, Emily, he said. Your stepfather is in custody. He can't hurt you or Ethan anymore." Emily's wide eyes searched his face, her breathing still shaky. "Are you sure?" she whispered. Mark nodded. "I'm sure. You're safe now." For the first time since arriving at the station, Emily seemed to relax slightly. She let out a shaky breath, her grip on Ethan loosening just a bit. Mark pulled up a chair and sat beside her. "CPS will be here soon," he said gently. "They'll find a safe place for you and Ethan to stay. And your mom, she's willing to cooperate. She wants to help." Emily's face darkened at the mention of her mother. "She didn't stop him," she said quietly. "She just let it happen." Mark didn't try to defend Mrs. Walker. Instead, he said, "Sometimes fear can make people do or not do things they regret. But she's here now, and she's ready to fight for you both." Emily said nothing, her gaze fixed on Ethan. Mark knew it would take time for her to process everything, but he hoped she could find some solace in knowing they were finally out of harm's way. "Emily," Mark said softly, "you've been incredibly brave through all of this. You did what a lot of adults couldn't do. You protected your brother." Emily looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of exhaustion and a faint glimmer of hope. She nodded slowly, holding Ethan close. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they would be okay. The quiet of the room was interrupted by a knock on the door. Emily flinched slightly, but Mark gave her a reassuring nod before standing to open it. A tall woman with a clipboard stepped inside, her tailored suit and calm demeanor radiating authority. "Officer Evans?" she asked, her eyes flicking between him and Emily. "I'm Jennifer Carter, from Child Protective Services." Mark extended a hand. "Thanks for coming so quickly, Ms. Carter. This is Emily and her baby brother, Ethan." Jennifer's expression softened as she stepped closer, crouching slightly to meet Emily's eye level. "Hi, Emily," she said warmly. "I'm here to help you and Ethan find a safe place to stay." Emily's grip on Ethan tightened, her wary eyes watching Jennifer's every move. "We don't need to go anywhere," she said. "We're fine here." Jennifer offered a gentle smile. "I understand why you'd feel that way, but staying here isn't an option. We'll make sure you're both somewhere safe with people who will take care of you." Emily didn't respond immediately. She glanced at Mark, her trust in him evident. Mark crouched beside Jennifer. "Emily," he said softly, "this is about making sure you and Ethan are protected for the long term. Jennifer's job is to find the best place for you. Somewhere safe, where your stepdad can't reach you." Emily's small frame seemed to shrink as the weight of the situation bore down on her. She looked down at Ethan, who had started to stir, his tiny face scrunching up in a sleepy yawn. "Will my mom come with us?" she asked quietly. Jennifer's smile faded slightly, replaced with a more measured look. "Your mom is talking with our team now. We're figuring out what's best for everyone. But for tonight, it'll just be you and Ethan." Emily's face fell, but she nodded reluctantly. She knew better than to argue when adults spoke in that firm, final tone. Jennifer straightened and glanced at Mark. "There's a foster home nearby that specializes in emergency placements. They're prepared to take the children immediately." Mark hesitated for a moment, then gave a small nod. "All right, Emily, you'll be staying with kind people who've helped kids in situations like yours before, and I'll make sure to check in on you." Emily's eyes flickered with uncertainty but also a flicker of trust. "You promise?" she whispered. Mark placed a hand over his heart. "I promise." The ride to the foster home was quiet. Jennifer drove while Mark sat in the back with Emily and Ethan. The baby had finally fallen asleep again, his tiny hand resting against Emily's chest. She stared out the window, the city lights blurring together as they passed. Mark occasionally glanced at her, noting the stiffness in her posture and the tension in her small hands. "It's okay to feel scared, Emily," he said gently. "But you're not alone in this." Emily didn't look at him, but she murmured, "I'm not scared for me. I'm scared for Ethan." Mark nodded, understanding the depth of her protective instincts. "You're doing everything you can for him. That makes you an amazing sister." They arrived at the foster home, a modest but well-kept house with a white picket fence. The porch light cast a warm glow as the front door opened, revealing a woman in her 60s with a kind face framed by silver hair. "Welcome," she said, stepping outside. "You must be Emily and Ethan." Jennifer introduced her as Mrs. Turner, the foster parent. She knelt to Emily's level and offered a smile. "You're safe here, sweetheart. Let's get you both inside and settled." Emily hesitated but eventually allowed herself to be guided inside. Mrs. Turner led them to a cozy living room with a crib already set up for Ethan. "You'll have your own room just down the hall," Mrs. Turner said softly. "And if you need anything at all, you just come find me." Emily nodded mutely, her grip on Ethan never wavering. Jennifer and Mark exchanged glances, both sensing the enormous strain Emily was under. Mark crouched down one last time. "Remember, Emily, this is just for now. We'll keep working on finding a more permanent solution, and I'll check in to see how you're doing." Emily's eyes met his, her voice barely above a whisper. "Will you really come back?" Mark smiled. "You can count on it." After leaving the foster home, Mark and Jennifer stood on the porch for a moment, the cool night air settling around them. "She's been through so much," Jennifer said, shaking her head. "But she's resilient. Kids like her often are." Mark exhaled heavily. "Resilient but not invincible. She shouldn't have had to carry this burden alone." Jennifer nodded. "Agreed. We'll do everything we can to ensure she and Ethan never go back to that house." Mark's jaw tightened as he thought about Walker, sitting in a cell back at the station. "He's not going to get away with this," he said firmly. "Not this time." Jennifer gave him a supportive pat on the arm. "And we'll make sure of that." As they walked back to the car, Mark couldn't shake the image of Emily's eyes, so young, yet filled with the weight of someone far beyond her years. He vowed silently to himself, no matter what it took, he would keep his promise to her. The night was unusually quiet as Mark drove back to the precinct. His thoughts tangled. Emily's small, determined face lingered in his mind. It wasn't the first time he'd encountered a child forced to grow up too quickly, but something about her resolve struck a deeper chord. When he arrived, the station was still buzzing. Officer Harris was at the desk, reviewing files, and another officer was escorting Victor Walker down the hallway to the holding cells. Walker's face was a mask of barely contained fury, his eyes burning with the promise of revenge. Mark watched him disappear into the cell block before heading to his desk. He barely had time to sit before Harris approached, her expression a mix of curiosity and concern. "Busy night," she said, setting a folder down. "The Walker case is heating up. CPS just sent over some preliminary reports. It's worse than we thought." Mark opened the folder and scanned the contents. The pages detailed a pattern of escalating violence. Instances of physical abuse corroborated by neighbors who had heard screaming and even seen bruises on Emily's arms. There was also a report about a hospital visit for Ethan, barely a month old at the time, with suspicious injuries that had been explained away as accidents. Mark's grip on the paper tightened. "Why didn't anyone act sooner?" he muttered, frustration seeping into his voice. Harris sighed. "Same old story. Inconsistent evidence. A terrified mother unwilling to press charges." It fell through the cracks. Mark closed the folder, his jaw clenched. Not this time. Meanwhile, back at the foster home, Emily sat in the small bedroom assigned to her. The walls were painted a soft blue, and the bed was covered in a quilt that smelled faintly of lavender. Ethan slept soundly in the crib nearby, his tiny chest rising and falling with each breath. But Emily couldn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling, her mind racing with 1,000 fears. Every creak of the house made her flinch, her heart pounding as if expecting Victor to burst through the door at any moment. Mrs. Turner's soft knock on the door broke the silence. She entered with a glass of warm milk, her kind eyes full of understanding. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked gently. Emily shook her head. Mrs. Turner sat beside her on the bed, placing the glass on the nightstand. "It's hard to rest when your mind's so full," Mrs. Turner said. "But you're safe here, Emily. No one can hurt you or Ethan." Emily bit her lip, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "What if he finds us?" she whispered. Mrs. Turner reached out, smoothing Emily's hair. "The police won't let that happen. And neither will I. You've been so strong. But it's okay to let others help now." For a moment, Emily said nothing. Then, tentatively, she leaned into Mrs. Turner's comforting embrace. It was the first time in what felt like forever that she let herself feel the weight of her fear and exhaustion. The next morning, Mark was already at his desk, reviewing case files when his phone buzzed. It was Jennifer from CPS. "Morning, Evans," she said briskly. "We've got an update. Mrs. Walker has agreed to file a restraining order against Victor." Mark sat up straighter. "That's a big step. Is she sticking to it?" "She's scared, but determined," Jennifer replied. "She wants to be reunited with her kids, but we'll need to assess her capacity to keep them safe first." Mark nodded, understanding the delicate balance. "We'll support her as much as we can." Jennifer hesitated. "There's something else. Victor's been making noise in the holding cells. He's demanding to see his lawyer and threatening to expose everyone involved." Mark's jaw tightened. "Let him talk. He's not getting out of this." After hanging up, Mark headed to the holding area. When he arrived, Victor was pacing his cell, his eyes wild and filled with anger. "Evans," he barked, "you think you're a hero, don't you? Taking my family away." Mark stood just outside the bars, arms crossed. "Your family doesn't need a man who abuses them," Victor sneered. "You don't know anything about my family. Emily's a liar, just like her mother. They've always been against me." Mark's gaze didn't waver. "Your record speaks for itself, Walker, and the courts will hear every word of it." Victor leaned in, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You think a piece of paper will stop me? You have no idea what I'm capable of." Mark didn't flinch. "And you have no idea what happens to people like you when the law catches up." Victor's laugh was low and menacing. "We'll see about that." Mark turned on his heel, walking away without another word. He knew men like Victor thrived on fear and intimidation, but he also knew the system could work if everyone played their part. Later that day, Mark drove out to visit Emily and Ethan at the foster home. When he arrived, Mrs. Turner greeted him warmly and led him to the backyard, where Emily was sitting on a swing, gently swaying back and forth. "Emily," Mark called softly. She looked up, a flicker of relief crossing her face. Mark sat on the swing beside her. "I told you I'd check in," he said with a small smile. Emily nodded. "Ethan's okay. He's sleeping again." "That's good to hear," Mark said. "How are you holding up?" Emily shrugged, her gaze fixed on the ground. "It's weird being here. It's nice, but it doesn't feel like home." Mark nodded, understanding. "It'll take time, but you've got people looking out for you now." Emily hesitated, then asked, "What's going to happen to my mom?" Mark's expression grew serious. "She's working with CPS. If she can show she's ready to protect you and Ethan, you'll be together again. But it has to be a safe situation." Emily's shoulders relaxed slightly. "I hope she can do it." Mark placed a hand on her shoulder. "We'll help her, and we'll keep fighting for you, Emily. You're not alone anymore." For the first time in days, Emily allowed herself a small smile. Emily's days at Mrs. Turner's house slowly settled into a routine. Though her guard remained up, she began to acclimate to the quiet safety of the foster home. Ethan, oblivious to the turmoil that had uprooted their lives, continued to thrive. His chubby hands reached for anything within grasp, and his giggles became a soothing reminder to Emily of why she'd done everything she could to protect him. One afternoon, as sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, Emily sat at the table drawing while Mrs. Turner prepared lunch. A soft knock at the door interrupted the calm. Mrs. Turner wiped her hands on a towel and went to answer it. Moments later, Mark Evans stepped into the house, his expression neutral but his eyes scanning the room for Emily. When he spotted her, a small smile lifted the corner of his mouth. "Hey, Emily," he said. "Mind if we talk for a minute?" Emily put down her pencil, her face serious. "Is something wrong?" Mark shook his head as he pulled out a chair beside her. "Not wrong, but important. We've got some updates." In the living room, Mark explained that CPS had finalized a temporary restraining order against Victor. However, the court date to make it permanent was approaching fast. "Your mom has agreed to testify," Mark said, watching Emily carefully. "But there's a chance Victor's lawyer will try to paint a different picture in court." Emily's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Mark leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "They'll try to say your stepdad didn't do anything wrong, that maybe you're exaggerating or misremembering things." Emily's small fists clenched. "But I'm not lying. He hurt us." Mark's voice was steady. "I know, and the evidence is on your side. But we need your testimony too. Can you do that, Emily? Can you tell the court what happened?" She looked down, her fingers tracing invisible patterns on her jeans. The thought of facing Victor again made her stomach churn. But she knew this was her chance to make sure he couldn't hurt them anymore. "I'll do it," she said quietly. Mark nodded, pride evident in his eyes. "You're brave, Emily. This is how we make sure you and Ethan stay safe." The days leading up to the court date were tense. Emily found herself jumping at every small sound, her sleep plagued by nightmares where Victor found them and took Ethan away. Mrs. Turner noticed and gently encouraged her to talk about her fears, but Emily rarely opened up. On the morning of the hearing, Jennifer Carter from CPS arrived to escort Emily and Mrs. Turner to the courthouse. Mark met them at the entrance, his presence a reassuring anchor in the sea of anxiety that churned within Emily. Inside, the courtroom was stark and imposing. The high ceilings and rows of wooden benches felt overwhelming. Emily clutched Ethan tightly, her knuckles white. Victor was already there, seated beside his lawyer. His eyes burned with a mixture of hatred and smug confidence. He didn't look at Emily directly, but she could feel the weight of his presence like a dark cloud looming over her. Mark sat beside her, leaning down to whisper, "Remember, you're not alone. Just tell the truth." When it was her turn to testify, Emily's legs felt like lead as she walked to the witness stand. She sat down, her heart pounding so loudly she could barely hear the questions from the prosecutor. But then she glanced at Ethan, safely cradled in Mrs. Turner's arms, and a surge of resolve steadied her. She took a deep breath and began to speak. Emily recounted the nights of terror in vivid detail. The slamming doors, the belt striking her back, and the moments when Victor's anger turned toward Ethan. Her voice trembled but did not falter as she described how she had shielded her brother, how her mother had begged Victor to stop, and how the fear never left their home. When the defense lawyer rose to cross-examine her, he wore a practiced smile meant to disarm. "Emily," he began smoothly, "you've been through a lot, haven't you?" She nodded cautiously. "And it's clear you love your brother very much." "Yes," she said firmly. The lawyer's tone remained light, almost sympathetic. "Would you say it's possible that, in your desire to protect him, you might have misinterpreted some of your stepfather's actions?" Emily frowned. "What do you mean?" "Perhaps you saw things differently because you were scared," he suggested. "Sometimes, in frightening situations, our memories can play tricks on us." Emily's hands clenched in her lap. "I know what I saw," she said sharply. "He hurt Ethan. He hurt me. That's the truth." The lawyer's smile faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. "Of course. No further questions, Your Honor." As Emily stepped down from the stand, her legs wobbled. Mark was waiting, giving her a small, reassuring nod as she returned to her seat. Ethan's quiet cooing greeted her, and she felt a wave of relief. The judge recessed to deliberate, and the wait felt interminable. Every second stretched into an eternity as Emily sat with Mark, Mrs. Turner, and Jennifer. Even Ethan seemed to sense the tension, his usual babbling replaced by quiet whimpers. Finally, the judge returned. Everyone rose as she took her seat and began to read her decision. Her words were clear and firm. The restraining order would be made permanent, and Victor Walker would face charges for child abuse. Victor erupted in outrage, his voice echoing in the courtroom. "This isn't justice," he shouted as officers moved to escort him out. "You're all gonna regret this." But his threats were empty against the gavel that struck with finality. Emily clung to Ethan, tears streaming down her face. Not of fear, but of profound relief. Mark placed a hand on her shoulder. "It's over, Emily. You did it. For the first time in weeks, Emily allowed herself to believe those words. The days after the court hearing brought a strange mixture of relief and uncertainty for Emily. Victor was gone, locked away where he couldn't hurt her or Ethan anymore, but the scars he'd left behind were harder to banish. Even in the safety of Mrs. Turner's home, Emily found herself jumping at shadows and clenching her fists at the faintest sound of raised voices. Mark visited regularly, checking in on her progress. His presence was a comfort, a steady reminder that she wasn't alone in her fight to rebuild a sense of normalcy. One afternoon, Mark sat with her on the back porch. The air was cool, carrying the scent of freshly cut grass. Ethan was asleep in a stroller nearby, his tiny breaths barely audible. "How's everything going, Emily?" Mark asked, his tone casual but laced with genuine concern. Emily shrugged, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "It's better," she said after a pause, "but I still feel scared, like he's watching, even though I know he can't be." Mark nodded, understanding. "That's normal. What you went through was terrifying, and it's going to take time for your mind to catch up with the fact that you're safe now." Emily glanced at him, her small face serious. "Do you think he'll come back? Even after what the judge said?" Mark's jaw tightened briefly. "Victor won't come near you again, Emily. He's being watched closely, and if he tries anything, we'll know about it." Emily seemed to take some comfort in that, though the worry in her eyes didn't entirely fade. Meanwhile, Mrs. Walker was undergoing her own transformation. With the support of CPS and counseling, she began to confront the years of abuse she had endured and the choices she had made under Victor's control. She knew she had to prove herself if she wanted to reunite with her children. Jennifer Carter kept Mark updated on Mrs. Walker's progress. "She's making strides," Jennifer reported during one of their meetings. "She's attending therapy sessions regularly and working on securing stable housing. But it's going to take time." Mark nodded, his mind on Emily. "Does Emily know?" "Not yet," Jennifer said. "We're waiting until there's more concrete progress. She's been through enough, and we don't want to give her false hope." Mark agreed. He knew how fragile Emily's trust was and how easily it could be shaken. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Emily was helping Mrs. Turner prepare dinner. The familiar routine of peeling carrots and setting the table brought a sense of calm. Ethan sat in a high chair, happily gnawing on a soft teething toy. The peace was broken by the sound of a car pulling up outside. Emily froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Mrs. Turner quickly stepped in, placing a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. "It's all right," she said gently. "Stay here. I'll check." Emily nodded, her hands gripping the edge of the counter. Her ears strained to catch every sound as Mrs. Turner walked to the door. There was a brief pause, followed by a quiet conversation. Then, Mrs. Turner returned, her expression calm but serious. "Emily," she said softly, "it's your mom." Emily's eyes widened. She hadn't seen her mother since the day she'd fled with Ethan. Part of her wanted to run to her, to feel her mother's arms around her again. But another part, the part that remembered her mother's silence during Victor's reign of terror, held her back. "Do you want to see her?" Mrs. Turner asked, giving Emily the choice. After a long pause, Emily nodded. "Okay." Mrs. Walker stood in the living room, looking more vulnerable than Emily had ever seen her. Her clothes hung loosely on her frame, and her eyes were rimmed with red, but there was a new determination in her posture. "Emily," she said softly, her voice cracking, "I've missed you so much." Emily stayed near the doorway, her arms crossed protectively over her chest. "Why are you here?" she asked, her tone cautious. Mrs. Walker swallowed hard. "I've been working with CPS. I'm trying to get better, to be the mom you and Ethan deserve." Emily's eyes narrowed. "Why didn't you stop him before?" Tears welled in Mrs. Walker's eyes. "I was scared," she admitted, her voice trembling. "I was weak, but you were so strong, Emily. You saved Ethan when I couldn't. And now I'm trying to be strong too." Emily stared at her mother, a whirlwind of emotions swirling inside her. She wanted to believe her, to trust that her mother was finally ready to fight for them. But the wounds were still fresh. Mrs. Walker stepped closer, her hands trembling. I know it's going to take time, she said, but I want to earn your trust again. I want us to be a family. Emily hesitated, her gaze shifting to Ethan, who was watching curiously from his high chair. Slowly, she nodded. Okay, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But you have to prove it. Mrs. Walker nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. I will, she promised. Later that night, as Emily lay in bed, she thought about her mother's visit. The anger and hurt were still there, but for the first time, they were accompanied by a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, things could be different. Mark's words echoed in her mind. You're not alone anymore. And for the first time, she started to believe it. The days following Mrs. Walker's visit were a blend of cautious hope and lingering doubt. Emily couldn't shake the memory of her mother's tearful promises, but her heart was still guarded. Mrs. Turner, sensing the emotional strain, encouraged Emily to channel her thoughts through journaling. Every evening, Emily would sit by the window, scribbling her feelings onto the pages of a notebook Mrs. Turner had given her. One crisp autumn morning, Emily woke to the sound of soft murmurs from the kitchen. She padded down the hall and peeked around the corner. There, she saw Mrs. Walker sitting at the table with Mrs. Turner, sipping coffee. Their conversation was quiet, but the seriousness of their expressions told Emily they were discussing something important. Mrs. Turner noticed Emily first. Good morning, Emily, she said warmly. Come join us. Mrs. Walker looked up, her face a mixture of relief and nervousness. Emily hesitated but eventually walked over and sat down, her gaze darting between the two women. Your mom wanted to talk to you about something, Mrs. Turner said gently. Emily's stomach twisted. What is it? She asked, her voice cautious. Mrs. Walker took a deep breath. I found a place for us to live, she said. A small apartment, not far from here. CPS approved it, and they believe it's a good next step for us. Emily's eyes widened. You mean, you want me and Ethan to come live with you? Mrs. Walker nodded. Only if you're ready, she said quickly. I know I still have a lot to prove, and I'll understand if you need more time. But I want you to know I'm working hard to be better. Emily sat in silence, her mind racing. She glanced at Mrs. Turner, who gave her an encouraging nod. You don't have to decide right now, Mrs. Turner said. Take your time. That evening, Mark stopped by for one of his regular check-ins. Emily told him about her mother's offer, her voice a mix of excitement and uncertainty. What do you think, Emily? Mark asked after she finished. I don't know, she admitted. It's what I wanted for so long, for us to be together again. But I'm scared. What if she can't handle it? Mark leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. It's okay to be scared, he said. Trust takes time to rebuild, and it's smart to be cautious. But it sounds like your mom is trying to make things right. If you feel ready, this could be a chance to start fresh. Emily fiddled with the hem of her sweater. What if it doesn't work out? Mark leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Then we'll be here to help, just like we've been all along. You're not going into this alone, Emily. His words gave her a small measure of comfort. Thanks, Mark, she said quietly. A week later, Emily made her decision. With Mrs. Turner and Mark's support, she agreed to move into the new apartment with her mother and Ethan. The transition was carefully planned, with regular visits from CPS to ensure everything was going smoothly. The apartment was modest but cozy. Emily's room had a bed with a soft pink quilt and a small desk by the window. Ethan's crib was set up in the corner of the living room, and toys were scattered across the floor. Mrs. Walker threw herself into creating a sense of normalcy for her children. She cooked meals, helped Emily with her homework, and spent hours playing with Ethan. Slowly, Emily began to relax. She even caught herself laughing sometimes, a sound that had felt foreign for so long. One night, as they sat together on the couch watching a movie, Mrs. Walker turned to Emily. I'm proud of you, she said softly. You've been so strong through everything. You're the reason we're here now. Emily looked down, her cheeks flushing with a mix of pride and embarrassment. I just did what I had to, she said. Mrs. Walker reached out and gently took her hand. You did more than that. You saved us. For the first time, Emily allowed herself to believe that maybe her mother was right. But healing is rarely linear. Despite the growing stability, shadows from the past occasionally crept in. One afternoon, as Emily and Ethan played in the park, she heard a man's voice behind her. A deep, gruff voice that made her freeze. "Emily," the voice called. Her heart stopped. She spun around, clutching Ethan protectively. But it wasn't Victor. It was just a stranger asking if she'd dropped her scarf. Relief flooded her, but her hands shook as she realized how deeply ingrained her fear still was. When she told her mother about it later, Mrs. Walker hugged her tightly. "We're safe now," she whispered. "He can't hurt us anymore." Emily nodded, but the incident served as a reminder that the road ahead would still have its challenges. That evening, Mark visited to deliver some unexpected news. "We've just received word from the DA's office," he said. "Victor's sentencing hearing is scheduled for next month." Emily felt her stomach churn. The thought of Victor still had the power to unsettle her deeply. Mark placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You won't have to testify again. They have all the evidence they need to keep him away for a long time." Emily exhaled slowly, the tension in her shoulders easing. "Good," she said. "I don't want to see him again." Mark nodded. "You won't have to." As he left, Emily felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that Victor would soon face justice and a lingering unease about what his sentencing would bring. That night, as Emily lay in bed, she thought about how far she'd come. There was still a long way to go, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a spark of hope. She glanced at Ethan sleeping peacefully in his crib and smiled. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, more to herself than to him. And for the first time, she truly believed it. The sentencing hearing approached faster than Emily expected. Although she wouldn't have to face Victor again in court, the mere thought of the hearing dredged up old fears. Mrs. Walker tried to shield her from the details, but Emily could tell the weight of it was affecting her mother too. Mark came by the night before the hearing to reassure them. "Tomorrow is about closure," he said. "The judge will make it official. Victor won't be able to hurt you again." Mrs. Walker nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I just want this to be over," she murmured. Emily stayed quiet, her gaze fixed on Ethan as he played on the floor. She felt a strange mix of relief and dread. Would the hearing truly put an end to Victor's control over their lives? The next morning, the apartment was filled with a tense silence. Emily sat at the kitchen table, picking at her breakfast while her mother paced the room. Jennifer Carter arrived to accompany Mrs. Walker to court, offering a steady presence amid the nerves. Emily watched her mother leave, feeling a pang of guilt for not going with her. But she knew this was something her mom had to face alone. Mrs. Turner came over to stay with Emily and Ethan. She suggested they bake cookies to keep busy, and soon the apartment was filled with the comforting smell of chocolate chip dough. As they worked, Emily found herself talking about the past few months, something she hadn't done much of since leaving the foster home. "It's weird," she said, shaping a ball of dough in her hands. "Sometimes I feel like things are getting better, but then I remember everything that happened, and it's like I'm back in that house again." Mrs. Turner nodded, her hands moving deftly as she placed cookies on a tray. "Healing takes time," she said gently. "You've been through more than most kids your age, but you've also shown incredible strength." Emily glanced at Ethan, who was happily banging a wooden spoon on the floor. "I just want him to grow up safe," she said softly. "He will," Mrs. Turner assured her, "because you've made sure of it." Meanwhile, at the courthouse, Mrs. Walker sat anxiously in the gallery. Victor was led into the courtroom in handcuffs, his face a mask of defiance. He refused to meet her gaze, but his presence still sent a chill down her spine. The prosecutor laid out the case with precision, detailing Victor's history of abuse and the impact it had on Emily and Ethan. The defense offered little in response, knowing the evidence was overwhelming. When the judge delivered the sentence, 15 years in prison with no chance of parole for at least 10, Mrs. Walker felt a wave of relief wash over her. Victor would no longer be a threat to her family. But as she left the courthouse, a different emotion took hold: determination. This was her chance to rebuild, to prove to her children and to herself that she could be the mother they deserved. That evening, when Mrs. Walker returned home, Emily immediately sensed a change in her. Her mother's shoulders, usually hunched with worry, were held a little higher. Her eyes, though tired, held a spark of renewed resolve. "It's done," Mrs. Walker said, her voice steady. "He's gone." Emily nodded, a lump forming in her throat. "Good." Mrs. Walker sat beside her, taking her hand. "We're free now, Emily. It's time for us to move forward." Over the next few weeks, the family settled into a new rhythm. Mrs. Walker found a part-time job at a local bakery, which she juggled with her therapy sessions. Emily returned to school, where she began to make friends and rediscover the joys of being a kid. Ethan, now crawling and babbling, became a beacon of light in their lives. His laughter filled the apartment, reminding them of how far they'd come. Mark and Jennifer continued to check in, their visits becoming less about oversight and more about celebrating the family's progress. One day, Mark brought a gift, a framed photo of Emily and Ethan, taken during one of their outings to the park. "You've built something beautiful here," he said, setting the frame on the mantel. "Hold on to it." Emily smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "We will." One quiet evening, as Emily lay in bed, she thought about the journey they'd been on. There were still moments of fear and doubt, but they no longer defined her. She was learning to let go of the past, to focus on the future she was building with her family. She glanced over at Ethan, who was fast asleep in his crib. His tiny hand clutched a stuffed bear, his face peaceful. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, echoing the promise she'd made to herself weeks ago. And for the first time, she truly believed it. The air in the small apartment was filled with the quiet hum of life returning to normal. Days were no longer marked by fear but by simple routines. School for Emily, work for Mrs. Walker, an endless discovery for Ethan as he crawled around exploring every corner of their new home. One afternoon, Emily walked home from school, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. The crisp autumn air carried the faint scent of leaves and distant fireplaces. She felt lighter, more at ease, though the shadows of the past still lingered at the edges of her mind. As she approached the apartment building, she spotted Mark's familiar figure leaning casually against his car, arms crossed, a smile on his face. "Officer Evans," Emily called out, a grin breaking across her face. Mark raised an eyebrow. "Mark," he corrected, stepping forward. "How many times do I have to tell you? I'm off duty." Emily laughed. "What are you doing here?" "I was in the neighborhood," he said with a shrug. "Thought I'd drop by and see how you and Ethan are doing." They walked into the building together. Inside, Mrs. Walker was in the kitchen, her sleeves rolled up as she worked on dinner. Ethan sat in his high chair, waving a plastic spoon like a wand. "Mark," Mrs. Walker greeted him warmly. "You're just in time. Stay for dinner?" Mark hesitated, but Emily chimed in before he could decline. "You have to stay. Mom makes the best chicken pot pie." He chuckled. "Well, I can't say no to that." Dinner was lively. For the first time in a long while, laughter echoed through the apartment. Mark shared stories about his early days on the force, and even Mrs. Walker let out a genuine laugh at his tales of rookie blunders. After dinner, as Emily helped clear the table, Mark pulled her aside. "I'm proud of you," he said. "You've come a long way since that day in the station." Emily looked down, a shy smile tugging at her lips. "It wasn't just me," she said. "You, Mrs. Turner, Jennifer. You all helped." Mark nodded. "But you made the choice to fight for your family. That takes real strength." Emily's eyes met his, filled with gratitude. "Thanks, Mark, for everything." Later that evening, after Mark had left, Mrs. Walker sat with Emily on the couch. The apartment was quiet, save for the gentle hum of the refrigerator and Ethan's soft snores from his crib. "I've been thinking," Mrs. Walker began, her voice hesitant. "Maybe it's time we start fresh in a new place. A new city." Emily's brow furrowed. "You want to move?" Mrs. Walker nodded. "We've come so far, but I think a fresh start could help us leave the past behind for good." Emily considered this. The apartment had become a haven, a place where they'd begun to heal. But she understood her mother's desire to rebuild their lives entirely, away from the memories that still haunted them. "Where would we go?" Emily asked. Mrs. Walker smiled softly. "I've been looking at a small town a few hours away. It's quiet, has a good school for you, and a safe community for Ethan." Emily nodded slowly. "If it's what you think is best, I'm okay with it." Mrs. Walker pulled her into a hug. "Thank you, Emily, for trusting me." The following weeks were a whirlwind of packing and preparations. Mark and Jennifer helped coordinate the move, ensuring a smooth transition. When the day finally came, Emily stood in the empty apartment, her hand resting on the doorframe. "Ready?" Mrs. Walker asked gently, holding Ethan in her arms. Emily took a deep breath and nodded. "Yeah, let's go." They loaded the last of their belongings into the car. As they pulled away, Emily watched the apartment building fade into the distance, a mix of sadness and hope swirling in her chest. Their new home was everything Mrs. Walker had promised. A small, cozy house with a backyard where Ethan could play once he started walking. The neighborhood was quiet, and their neighbors were friendly, often stopping by to introduce themselves and offer help. Emily quickly settled into her new school, making friends who didn't know about her past. For the first time, she felt like she could just be a kid again. Mrs. Walker found work at a local bakery, and the steady routine brought a sense of stability they hadn't known in years. Evenings were spent together, playing board games, watching movies, or simply enjoying each other's company. One night, as Emily lay in bed, she reflected on how much had changed. She thought about Victor, now a distant shadow in their lives, and the journey that had brought them here. For the first time, the future felt like a blank canvas, full of possibilities. She glanced at the framed photo Mark had given her, the one of her and Ethan at the park. It was a reminder of how far they'd come and the people who had helped them along the way. "We're going to be okay," she whispered, her heart full of quiet determination. And this time, there was no doubt in her mind. The first snow of the season blanketed the small town, transforming the landscape into a winter wonderland. Emily stood by the living room window, watching as Ethan toddled through the backyard, bundled up in layers, his laughter muffled by the thick scarf around his neck. Mrs. Walker was outside with him, her cheeks flushed from the cold, but her smile was bright as she encouraged Ethan to chase after a ball. Inside, the house was warm, filled with the comforting aroma of cookies baking in the oven. Emily had just finished decorating the Christmas tree, carefully hanging each ornament in its perfect spot. This year, the tree wasn't just a symbol of the holidays. It was a testament to how far they'd come. The sound of a car pulling up drew her attention. She peeked out the window and smiled when she saw Mark stepping out, holding a wrapped gift under his arm. He knocked once before stepping in, brushing snow off his coat. "Merry Christmas, Emily," he said with a grin. "Merry Christmas, Mark," she replied, rushing over to greet him. Mark placed the gift under the tree and glanced around, nodding in approval. "The place looks great. Feels like home." Emily's smile widened. "It does." Mrs. Walker and Ethan soon joined them, bringing in the crisp scent of winter. Ethan, now walking with growing confidence, toddled over to Mark and tugged on his pant leg. "Hey there, buddy," Mark said, scooping him up. "You've gotten big since I last saw you." Ethan giggled, his small hands reaching for Mark's badge. They all gathered around the tree, and Mark handed out his gift, a new stuffed bear for Ethan, who hugged it tightly, and a journal for Emily, its leather cover embossed with her initials. "I thought you might like a fresh one," Mark said as Emily ran her fingers over the cover. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's perfect." Later that evening, after Mark had left and Ethan was tucked in bed, Emily and her mother sat together by the fire. The glow of the flames danced across their faces, casting long shadows on the walls. "Do you ever think about the past?" Emily asked quietly, her gaze fixed on the flickering fire. Mrs. Walker nodded, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes," she admitted, "it's hard not to, but I try to focus on how far we've come, and on what we have now." Emily leaned against her mother's shoulder. "I'm glad we're here." Mrs. Walker wrapped an arm around her. "Me too, sweetheart." They sat in comfortable silence, the warmth of the fire wrapping around them like a protective blanket. In the following weeks, life settled into an easy rhythm. Emily thrived at school, earning praise from her teachers and forming close friendships. She joined the school's art club, where she found joy in sketching and painting, often drawing scenes from her new life. Ethan continued to grow, his curiosity and laughter filling the house with life. Mrs. Walker worked diligently at the bakery, her confidence blossoming with each passing day. Mark and Jennifer remained a constant presence, their visits serving as a reminder of the support system that had helped them rebuild. Though their roles shifted from guardians to friends, the bond they shared with the family remained unbreakable. One evening, Emily sat in her room, writing in her new journal. She reflected on the journey they had taken, the challenges they had overcome, and the people who had stood by them. She wrote about her dreams for the future, traveling, becoming an artist, and ensuring Ethan grew up knowing only love and safety. As she closed the journal, a sense of peace washed over her. The past no longer felt like a weight she had to carry alone. It was a part of her story, but it didn't define her. She glanced out the window, where the last traces of snow glistened under the moonlight. The world felt vast and full of possibilities. "We made it," she whispered to herself, a quiet smile on her lips. And for the first time, those words felt not like a hope, but a truth she could hold on to forever. The end. A girl finds an abandoned baby in a cardboard box in the trash and, instead of asking for help, decides to hide it at home. When the mother discovers it, a sad story comes to light. The kitchen trash bag felt unusually heavy as Sophie Mitchell dragged it across the linoleum floor, leaving a thin trail of coffee grounds that had escaped through a small tear in the plastic. She knew she should probably double bag it, but that would mean going back inside, and she had already put on her winter boots. Besides, her mother would be waking up soon for her night shift at the hospital, and Sophie wanted to finish her chores before then. October in Boston had turned bitter early this year. The late afternoon sky hung low and gray, threatening the season's first snow. Sophie pulled her red knit hat lower over her ears as she stepped out the back door of their narrow townhouse, the rusty hinges protesting with a screech that echoed off the brick walls of the alley. Her boots crunched against the thin layer of frost coating the ground, each step sending tiny echoes bouncing between the buildings. Their trash bins sat at the end of the alley, past Mrs. Henderson's overgrown rose bushes and Mr. Patterson's perpetually leaking air conditioning unit. Sophie had made this trip hundreds of times before, but something felt different today. The shadows seemed longer, the air charged with an electricity she couldn't explain. Her mother's voice echoed in her head, "Always be aware of your surroundings, Sophie. The world isn't always a safe place." But she pushed the thought aside. She was halfway down the alley when she heard it, a sound so faint she almost convinced herself she had imagined it. A whimper, like a kitten's mewl, coming from behind the dented recycling bin. Sophie set down her trash bag and took a tentative step toward the sound, her heart beating in rhythm with the soft patter of beginning snowfall. "Here, kitty," she whispered, though something in her chest told her this wasn't a cat. The sound came again, stronger this time, unmistakably human. Behind the recycling bin sat a large cardboard box, the kind her mother's Amazon packages came in, but this one was worn and soggy from the previous night's rain. The flaps were folded shut, but not completely closed. Sophie's hands trembled as she reached for them, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her mother's warnings about stranger danger and suspicious situations flashed through her mind, but something stronger, something that felt like destiny, pulled her forward. The baby inside was tiny, smaller than any baby she had ever seen, wrapped in what looked like a pale pink pillowcase. Its face was scrunched and red, little fists balled up against its chest. As Sophie stared, paralyzed, the baby's eyes opened dark blue, almost purple, and locked onto hers. "Oh," Sophie breathed, and the sound seemed to startle the infant, who began to cry in earnest now, a thin wail that cut through the cold air like a knife. The cry sent Sophie tumbling back into a memory. Tommy at 3 in the morning, his small body burning with fever, reaching for her from his hospital bed. So he'd called her, his special nickname for her, even when the pain medications made him confused about everything else. Sophie glanced frantically up and down the alley. She should run inside and get her mother. She should call 911. She should do any number of things that responsible people do in emergencies. But all she could think about was how cold it was, and how the baby's cry sounded exactly like Tommy's had 2 years ago, in those final days at the hospital when nothing she did could make things better. Without letting herself think about it too much, Sophie shrugged off her puffy winter coat and reached into the box. The baby was surprisingly light, its head fitting perfectly in the crook of her elbow, just like the dolls she used to practice with when Tommy was first born. She wrapped her coat around the infant, tucking the edges in carefully, the way she'd learned from watching the nurses with her brother. "It's okay, little one," she whispered, gently brushing her thumb across the baby's cheek. "I've got you. I won't let anything bad happen to you." The baby's crying softened at her touch, turning into tiny hiccups that made Sophie's heart ache with remembered tenderness. Inside their house, she could hear the shower running upstairs, her mother getting ready for work. Sophie had maybe 20 minutes before Ellen came downstairs for her pre-shift coffee. 20 minutes to make a decision that would change everything. The warmth of the house enveloped them as Sophie slipped inside, the contrast with the bitter cold making her realize just how dangerous it had been for the baby to be outside. She looked down at the infant, now quieter in the warmth of her coat. Its eyes were closed again, dark lashes fanned against flushed cheeks. Something fierce and protective bloomed in Sophie's chest, something she hadn't felt since those nights of watching over Tommy, promising him the sun would rise and things would be better tomorrow. Sophie knew what the right thing to do was, but sometimes she thought the right thing wasn't the thing that needed to be done. Not when you'd already lost someone you were supposed to protect. Carefully, moving slower than she ever had in her life, Sophie carried the baby toward her bedroom. Her room was on the first floor, thank goodness, and her closet was big enough. She had all her old baby doll things stored in there: bottles, blankets, even some diapers she had bought with her allowance money last year when she was going through what her mother called her maternal phase. The back door creaked again as she entered, and Sophie froze. But the shower was still running upstairs, and her mother's bedroom door was closed. She made it to her room and closed the door with her hip, then stood in the middle of her butterfly wallpapered bedroom, holding a baby that wasn't hers, trying to convince herself she wasn't making a horrible mistake. "I'll figure something out," she promised the sleeping infant, her voice catching as she remembered making similar promises to Tommy. I need some time to think. I'll do better this time." The shower turned off upstairs and Sophie jumped. Quickly, she cleared a space in her closet, creating a nest of soft sweaters and her spare comforter. She placed the baby down as gently as she could, surrounding it with pillows to keep it from rolling. "Sweet dreams, little one," she whispered, brushing her fingers across the baby's forehead in a gesture that felt achingly familiar. "Sophie," her mother called from upstairs. "Did you take the trash out?" "Yes, Mom." She closed the closet door most of the way, leaving just a crack for air. "Just finished." "Thank you, honey. I'll be down in a minute to make coffee before work." Sophie sat on her bed, heart racing, staring at the closet door. The baby made a small snuffling sound but didn't cry. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall, dusting the alley where an empty cardboard box sat collecting white flakes. The soft shush of falling snow against her window seemed to whisper secrets, promises, warnings. In her mind, Sophie could hear Tommy's voice, the way he used to say her name when he needed something in the middle of the night. She hadn't been able to help him then, but maybe, just maybe, she could help this baby now. She pulled out her phone and opened a new Google search, "How to take care of a newborn baby." The results loaded as her mother's footsteps creaked on the stairs, each step bringing them closer to a moment that would change their lives forever. A floorboard groaned directly above her room, making Sophie's fingers freeze on her phone screen. The weight of her secret pressed against her chest, heavy as the snow-laden clouds outside. Sophie took a deep breath and began to read. At 3 in the morning, Sophie sat cross-legged on her bedroom floor, staring at the tiny bundle wrapped in her old gymnastics team sweatshirt. The baby. She'd started thinking of her as Lucy, after reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe last year and thinking how both she and Lucy Pevensey had found something magical in a closet, was finally sleeping after what felt like hours of fussy crying. "Please stay quiet," Sophie whispered, her eyes burning with exhaustion. Through her bedroom wall, she could hear the TV playing in Mrs. Henderson's apartment next door. The old woman's insomnia had never been more welcome. It had helped mask Lucy's crying, which Google had told her was normal for newborns but felt deafening in the midnight quiet of their house. The words on her phone screen blurred and doubled. Newborns need to eat every 2 to 3 hours. Even through the night, she blinked hard, trying to focus. Earlier, she'd caught herself putting a clean diaper on backwards, and it had taken 3 tries to measure the formula powder correctly. Her mother's voice echoed in her head from one of their post-Tommy talks. "Being responsible means knowing when you need help, Sophie. We can't always do everything alone." But asking for help meant admitting what she'd done, and Sophie couldn't bear the disappointment she knew would flood her mother's face. Not after Tommy. Not after all the promises they'd made to be honest with each other, to face things together, to do better. The empty formula bottle beside her seemed to mock these thoughts. She'd purchased it in a panic from the corner store after school, along with diapers and wipes that had nearly emptied her allowance savings. Mr. Patel hadn't even blinked when she'd bought it, just asked how her mother was doing. "She's fine," Sophie had lied, the words tasting like copper in her mouth. "She's just busy with work." The lies had snowballed from there. No, she wasn't hungry at dinner. She'd spent her lunch money on baby supplies. Yes, she was just tired from studying, not from being up all night with a crying infant. Of course she was keeping her door closed. She was working on a surprise art project, not hiding a baby in her closet. Each lie felt like a stone in her stomach, weighing her down. But every time she looked at Lucy's face, so trusting and vulnerable, she remembered finding Tommy in his room that last night, when his fever had spiked so high he didn't recognize her. She remembered how helpless she'd felt then, watching the paramedics take him away. She wouldn't be helpless this time. Lucy's sudden cry pierced through Sophie's exhaustion-fogged brain. The sound seemed to bounce off the walls, impossibly loud in the pre-dawn quiet. Sophie stumbled to her feet, her legs tingling from sitting too long, and nearly tripped over her school bag. "Please, please, please," she begged, lifting Lucy with trembling arms. The room swayed slightly, and Sophie had to lean against the wall to steady herself. She'd read somewhere that people could hallucinate from lack of sleep. Was that happening now? The butterfly wallpaper seemed to be moving, the patterns shifting and swirling. "I can't do this," she whispered, tears rolling down her cheeks as Lucy continued to wail. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." For a moment, just a moment, she understood why someone might leave a baby in an alley. Then she hated herself for even thinking it. Through sheer force of will, Sophie began the familiar dance of bouncing and swaying that had worked before. "Remember what Mom always says," she murmured to herself. "One problem at a time. Just solve one problem at a time." It had been their mantra during Tommy's illness, when the future had seemed too overwhelming to contemplate. Gradually, Lucy's cries softened to hiccups. Sophie checked her phone again. 3:17 a.m. Her mother would be home from her shift in less than an hour. Before Tommy got sick, Sophie used to wait up for Ellen to come home, loving how her mother would sweep in smelling of hand sanitizer and coffee, always with a smile and a story about helping someone. Now, Ellen came home quiet and drawn, carrying the weight of other people's pain along with her own. She leaned back against her bed, letting her head rest on the mattress. The ceiling fan spun lazily above her, creating shadows that danced across the walls. In the quiet, she could almost pretend this was 2 years ago, when she used to sneak into Tommy's room to check on him during his good nights, before the hospital became their second home. A car door slammed somewhere outside, and Lucy stirred. Sophie quickly reached for her, hands gentle but sure as she lifted the baby to her chest. "Shoo," she soothed, patting Lucy's back the way she'd seen her mother do with the neighbor's kids. "It's okay. Everything's okay. But it wasn't okay, and Sophie knew it. The websites had been clear. Newborns needed doctors, needed tests and shots and proper care. Lucy needed more than a scared 11-year-old could provide, no matter how many articles she read or how carefully she followed the instructions. The sound of a key in the front door lock made Sophie freeze mid-step. Her mother was home early. Sophie's heart began to pound so hard she was sure Lucy would wake up. With trembling hands, she placed the baby in her closet nest, arranging the blankets around her. "Please," she whispered, though she wasn't sure who she was talking to. "Please stay quiet." She had just closed the closet door when she heard her mother's footsteps in the hallway, heavier than usual, weighted with something more than physical exhaustion. They paused outside her room and Sophie dove for her bed, pulling the covers up to her chin just as the door creaked open. Ellen Mitchell's silhouette appeared in the doorway, backlit by the hallway night light. Her scrubs were wrinkled, and her hands, always so steady, even during Tommy's worst days, were fidgeting with her ID badge. "Sophie," she said softly, "are you awake?" Sophie considered pretending to be asleep, but she knew her breathing would give her away. "Yeah," she whispered back. "How was work?" Ellen stepped into the room, and Sophie could smell the hospital on her. Antiseptic and coffee and something else. Something that reminded Sophie of the day they'd learned Tommy's treatment wasn't working. Her mother sat on the edge of the bed, her movements careful, contained, as if she was holding something fragile inside herself. "We need to talk, sweetheart," Ellen said, running a hand through her graying hair. "Something happened at work tonight. A young mother. She left her baby at the hospital. Just walked away." Her voice caught slightly. "It reminded me of how many people are carrying pain we can't see. How sometimes good people make desperate choices." Sophie sat up slowly, her heart in her throat. In the closet, Lucy made a tiny sound, so soft it could have been the house settling. But Ellen's head turned toward the sound, her nurse's instincts as sharp as ever. Her whole body tensed, like a string pulled taut. "Sophie," she said, her voice different now. "What was that?" The world seemed to slow down as Ellen took another step into the room. Sophie opened her mouth, but no words came out. In the closet, Lucy began to cry. The sound filled the room like smoke, impossible to ignore or explain away. Sophie watched as her mother's face changed, confusion giving way to understanding, then to something complex and painful. Her hands, which had been fidgeting, suddenly went still. Ellen crossed the room in 3 quick steps and opened the closet door. The cry grew louder, more insistent. Sophie couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. "Oh my God," Ellen whispered, staring at the baby in the nest of blankets. Her hands were shaking now as she turned to Sophie, her face a battlefield of emotions. Shock, fear, anger, and underneath it all, a deep, aching sadness that Sophie recognized from the mirrors in their house after Tommy died. "Sophie Mitchell," Ellen said, her voice cracking on the name. "What have you done?" And just like that, Sophie's carefully constructed world of secrets began to crumble around her, like snow melting in the morning sun. But somewhere in the wreckage, in her mother's trembling hands and broken voice, she thought she caught a glimpse of something else, something that looked almost like understanding. Ellen Mitchell stood frozen by the open closet door, her silhouette sharp against the darkness beyond. For what felt like an eternity, the only sound in the room was Lucy's crying, which had settled into a steady, insistent rhythm that seemed to echo off the walls of Sophie's small bedroom. The sound filled every corner of the space, making the room feel both impossibly large and suffocatingly small at the same time. Sophie remained perched on her bed, her fingers clutching her comforter so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She watched her mother's face, trying to read the emotions that flickered across it like shadows from the streetlight outside. Shock, anger, disbelief, and something else. Something deeper that Sophie couldn't quite name. The digital clock on Sophie's nightstand clicked over to 4:13 a.m., its red numbers casting a faint crimson glow across the room. The sound of Mrs. Henderson's television next door had finally fallen silent, leaving them in a pocket of quiet broken only by Lucy's cries and the soft whoosh of the heating system cycling on. Finally, Ellen moved. With the practiced efficiency of a veteran nurse, She reached into the makeshift nest of blankets and lifted Lucy. The moment the baby settled into her arms, something flickered across Ellen's face, a ghost of the tenderness Sophie remembered from before Tommy's illness, when her mother's hands had healed scraped knees and checked foreheads for fever with equal measures of love and skill. It was an expression Sophie hadn't seen in so long that it made her throat tight with sudden tears. "Sure, little one," Ellen murmured, her voice professional yet gentle. "Let's have a look at you." Her fingers moved with practiced precision, checking temperature, noting breathing patterns, examining the baby's color and responsiveness with the kind of automatic competence that came from years of working in pediatrics. Lucy's cries softened under her touch, as if recognizing the familiar rhythm of medical care. Sophie watched as her mother's trained eyes scanned the baby, noting every detail of Sophie's amateur caretaking, the homemade diaper change, evident in the slightly crooked tape and uneven folds, the formula stains on the borrowed clothes that Sophie had tried to clean with baby wipes, the careful, if clumsy, way Sophie had tried to keep Lucy's head supported with rolled-up blankets. Each observation seemed to add another layer of tension to Ellen's already rigid posture. But there was something else there too, a slight tremor in her hands that Sophie hadn't seen since Tommy's final days. The tremor took Sophie back to that last week in the hospital, when her mother's hands had shaken as she'd straightened Tommy's blankets, adjusted his 4 lines, checked his vitals with movements that had become more desperate with each passing hour. Sophie had watched then, just as she watched now, feeling that same helpless ache in her chest. "Mom, Sophie began, but Ellen held up one hand, silencing her. The gesture was so familiar, the same one she'd used in Tommy's hospital room when she needed quiet to think, to plan, to make the kind of decisions that no mother should have to make. "How long?" The question cut through the room like a scalpel, precise and painful. Sophie swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry. "Since yesterday. I found her behind the recycling bins when I took out the trash." The words tumbled out, bringing with them the weight of all her other secrets, the stolen moments of sleep between feedings, the careful rationing of her allowance money for supplies, the constant fear of discovery. "She was in a box, Mom. Just left there like she was nothing, like nobody wanted her. I couldn't." "You couldn't what, Sophie?" Ellen's voice was dangerously quiet, but her eyes, when they met Sophie's, were swimming with unshed tears. In the dim light, they looked almost colorless, like the way they'd looked the day they'd left the hospital for the last time. Tommy's room empty behind them. "You couldn't call 911? You couldn't come get me? You couldn't do any of the things we've talked about, any of the responsible choices?" The word responsible hung in the air between them, heavy with the weight of all their post-Tommy conversations about doing the right thing, about being stronger, about moving forward. Sophie had promised so many things in those grief-filled months, to be more careful, more thoughtful, more mature. Now each promise felt like another stone in her stomach. Lucy's crying had softened to whimpers under Ellen's expert touch. The baby's dark eyes were open now, staring up at Ellen with that same trusting gaze that had captured Sophie's heart in the alley. Ellen looked down at the infant, and something in her face changed. Her expression softened almost imperceptibly as she traced a finger along a small birthmark on Lucy's shoulder, and suddenly all the color drained from her face. "Get your coat," she said, her voice tight with something that sounded like fear. She was already moving toward the door, her nurse's stride purposeful and quick. "We're taking her to the hospital." "No!" Sophie jumped up, panic surging through her exhaustion. Her vision blurred with tears as she imagined Lucy being taken away, disappearing into the system like so many stories she'd read online during her sleepless night of research. Stories of babies lost in bureaucratic mazes, of families separated, of chances at happiness slipping away like water through cupped hands. "Mom, please, you don't understand. I've been taking good care of her. I got formula and diapers and what about medical care?" Ellen turned back, her voice breaking on the last word. The movement caused Lucy to startle, and Ellen automatically began the swaying motion that all mothers seem to know instinctively, even as her words came sharp and fast. "What about jaundice screening? Metabolic testing? What about the vitamin K shot that prevents brain bleeding? The 100 other things a newborn needs that you can't provide, Sophie, because you are a child?" The word child hit Sophie like a physical blow, making her stumble back until her legs hit the edge of her bed. I wasn't trying to. She stopped, fighting back tears as the full weight of her actions crashed over her. Then, in a voice so small it was barely audible, she whispered the truth that had been driving her since she'd first heard that cry in the alley. She cried just like Tommy did. The silence that followed was absolute. Even Lucy seemed to sense the shift in the room's atmosphere, her whimpers fading to silence. Ellen stood very still, the baby in her arms, her face caught in a shaft of pre-dawn light that had begun to seep through the window. The light painted strange shadows across her features, making her look simultaneously younger and older than her years. When she spoke again, her voice was different, softer, as if the mention of Tommy had punctured something in her professional armor. "What do you mean?" Sophie wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm air flowing from the heating vent. The cold seemed to come from inside, from the place where she kept all her memories of Tommy, all the things she hadn't been able to say since he'd gone. That night when I found her, she made this sound, this little cry, and it was exactly like Tommy used to sound when he needed me. Remember how he would call for me even when the pain was really bad? How he trusted me to help him? He would reach out his hand, and I would hold it, and for a little while he wouldn't be scared anymore. Sophie's voice caught on a sob. He trusted me to help him, Mom, and I couldn't. I couldn't do anything except watch him hurt, watch him slip away. But with Lucy I could actually do something. I could keep her warm and fed and safe. I know it wasn't right, hiding her like this, but I needed to not be helpless again. Just for a little while. Ellen took one step toward her, then another, each movement careful as if she were walking on ice. In the growing light, Sophie could see tears tracking down her mother's cheeks, catching the dim light like tiny stars. Lucy had drifted off to sleep in Ellen's arms. One tiny hand curled around Ellen's finger in a gesture so trusting it made Sophie's heart ache. For a moment, mother and daughter sat in silence, watching the baby breathe. The quiet was broken by a distant siren somewhere in the city, its wail rising and falling like a cry of its own. Ellen flinched at the sound, her nurse's instincts obviously pulling her toward thoughts of emergencies and responsibilities. But instead of moving toward the door, she sank down onto the bed beside Sophie, still holding Lucy close. "Listen to me very carefully," Ellen said finally, her voice thick with emotion. She shifted Lucy slightly, adjusting her position with the kind of unconscious expertise that Sophie had tried so hard to imitate. "What happened to Tommy was not your fault. You were not helpless. You were there for him every single day, in ways that broke my heart and made me prouder than I've ever been." She paused, swallowing hard, and Sophie realized with a start that this was the first time they'd really talked about Tommy's last days since the funeral. They'd spoken around it, through it, past it, but never directly about those final moments when he'd slipped away despite all their love and care. But this, Ellen looked down at Lucy, and something shifted in her expression. The professional mask she'd worn since finding the baby began to crack, revealing the mother underneath. "This is different. This baby needs more than love and good intentions, Sophie. She needs medical care, and her mother might need help too." Sophie felt her stomach drop. Her mother left her in a box. "Mom, in the cold. How can you even think about—" "Yes." Ellen's voice was gentle now, tinged with an old pain that seemed to echo in the pre-dawn darkness. "And I think I might know why." She shifted Lucy to one arm and pulled her phone from her scrub's pocket with trembling fingers. "Remember how I said something happened at work tonight? A young girl came into the ER, 17, maybe 18. She'd just given birth, alone. She was scared, bleeding. We stabilized her. But when I went back to check on her, she was gone." Ellen's free hand brushed against Lucy's birthmark again, and suddenly she seemed far away, lost in a memory that played across her face like a shadow. "I used to trace the same mark on another baby years ago. Her mother, Katie, was my best friend in nursing school. We were so young then, so sure we were going to change the world." Her voice took on a distant quality, as if she were speaking from somewhere deep in the past. We'd study together in her tiny apartment, taking turns holding baby Megan while we quizzed each other on medication dosages. Katie would always say, Ellen's voice caught. She'd say that birthmark was shaped like a heart if you looked at it right. She had such a way of finding beauty in small things. The memory seemed to physically pain her, and Sophie watched as her mother's professional composure cracked further. We had so many plans, Katie and I. We were going to open our own pediatric clinic someday, somewhere we could really help people. But then the prescription pills started. Just for her back pain at first, she said. Just to get through the long shifts. Ellen's voice broke, and she had to take a moment to compose herself. Lucy stirred in her arms, making a small sound that brought them both back to the present. Katie died of an overdose 5 years ago, and I lost touch with the family. I should have stayed in contact, should have checked on Megan, should have... She trailed off, shaking her head. When I saw Megan in the ER tonight, it was like seeing Katie's ghost. And now this baby, Lucy, you called her? She has her mother's birthmark, her grandmother's eyes. Sophie stared at her mother's phone, which displayed a hospital intake form with a photo. The girl in the picture was hardly more than a child herself, with dark circles under her eyes and fear written across her face. But there was something else there too. Something in the set of her jaw that reminded Sophie of the determination she sometimes caught in her own reflection. This is Megan? Ellen nodded, blinking back tears as she looked between the phone and the sleeping baby in her arms. When I saw her in the ER, I didn't make the connection at first. It's been so long, and she's grown so much. But then I saw the birthmark on her shoulder, identical to the one Lucy has, and it all came rushing back. All the promises I'd made to Katie about watching out for her daughter, all the ways I'd failed to keep them. Sophie felt the world tilting beneath her as the pieces began to fall into place. So you know who she is? Who they both are? Ellen nodded slowly, her nurse's hands automatically adjusting Lucy's blanket against the pre-dawn chill. The gesture was so familiar, the same way she used to tuck Tommy in, that it made Sophie's heart ache. And now I have a choice to make. The right thing, the legal thing, would be to take this baby to the hospital right now and call the authorities. She looked at Sophie, and for the first time since Tommy's death, Sophie saw something like her old fire in her mother's eyes. But maybe, just maybe, there's a way to do the right thing and the kind thing at the same time. Maybe this is our chance to break the cycle, to help both the mother and the child, the way I should have done for Katie and Megan. What do you mean? Ellen stood, cradling Lucy with the same careful tenderness she'd once shown Tommy. The morning light was growing stronger now, painting the room in shades of pearl and promise. Get your coat, Sophie. We are going to the hospital, but first we're going to make a stop. There's a shelter on Maple Street where a lot of scared young mothers end up. I have a feeling we might find Megan there. And then what? Sophie asked, already reaching for her coat. Her movements quickened by a hope she hadn't dared to feel in a long time. Then, Ellen said, her voice firm but gentle, we try to help them both. The way I should have done 5 years ago. The way we Mitchell women are supposed to do. She paused, looking out the window where the first hints of dawn were painting the sky in shades of possibility. Maybe it's time we all step out of the dark. Maybe it's time we remember that sometimes the best way to heal our own wounds is to help heal someone else's. Sophie reached for her coat, her hands steadier now. As she followed her mother and Lucy out of her room, she thought about choices, the ones we make in moments of fear or love, the ones we regret, and the ones that give us a chance to make things right again. She thought about Tommy, and how he would have loved the idea of helping a baby, of being part of something bigger than their grief. The night outside was still dark, but somewhere to the east, the sky was beginning to lighten, promising a new day and, perhaps, a chance at healing for all of them. As they stepped out into the pre-dawn air, Sophie noticed that the snow had stopped falling, leaving the world covered in a fresh blanket of white, clean, untouched, full of possibility. The streetlights were just beginning to flicker out as Ellen's Honda Civic wound through Boston's empty streets. Sophie sat in the back seat next to Lucy, who was secured in Tommy's old car seat, something Ellen had silently retrieved from the basement before they left. The plastic still smelled faintly of baby powder and that particular scent that had been uniquely Tommy's. "She's sleeping," Sophie whispered, her hand resting gently on Lucy's chest, feeling each tiny rise and fall. The baby's breath came in small puffs of warmth against the cold car interior. Ellen had cranked up the heat, but the winter chill still clung to the edges of the windows, creating delicate patterns of frost that caught the pre-dawn light. Ellen's eyes met Sophie's in the rearview mirror. "You've been doing this all night, haven't you?" Watching her breathe, there was something in her mother's voice, not quite approval, but understanding. Sophie nodded, remembering the long hours of vigilance. "I was afraid to sleep, afraid she'd need something and I wouldn't hear her." She paused, then added quietly, like with Tommy, at the end. Ellen's hands tightened on the steering wheel, her knuckles white against the black leather. "Sophie, we need to talk about that. About Tommy and grief and how it makes us do things we might not otherwise do." "Mom, let me finish, please." Ellen's voice was gentle but firm as she turned onto Maple Street. The shelter, a converted Victorian mansion with peeling paint and warmly lit windows, rose before them like a ghost in the gathering dawn. What happened with Tommy? It changed us both. Changed how we see the world, how we react to things. And sometimes that change makes us want to fix everything we see broken, to save everyone we can. She pulled into the shelter's small parking lot, killing the engine but making no move to get out. "But we can't save everyone, Sophie. And sometimes, trying to do it alone just makes things worse." "Is that what happened with Megan's mom?" Sophie asked, watching a light flick on in one of the shelter's upper windows. "With Katie?" Ellen was quiet for so long that Sophie thought she might not answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with memory. She was like sunshine, always laughing, always seeing the best in people. Even when things were hard, and they were often hard, being a single mother in nursing school. She kept that light inside her. She took a shaky breath. But sometimes the brightest lights cast the darkest shadows. "I saw her struggling with the pain medication, saw how it was changing her, but I thought I could handle it alone. Thought I could save her myself. What happened? Life happened. Work happened. Tommy got sick, and I got distracted, and Katie slipped away, one prescription at a time." Ellen turned in her seat to face Sophie and Lucy. In the growing light, her face looked both younger and older than Sophie had ever seen it. "I've carried that guilt for years. But maybe that's not what Katie would have wanted. Maybe she would have wanted me to help her daughter instead of drowning in regret." Lucy stirred in her car seat, making a small sound that brought them both back to the present. Ellen reached back and touched the baby's cheek with infinite tenderness. "You know we have to tell the authorities eventually, right? About finding her." Sophie felt tears prick at her eyes. "I know, but can we try to help Megan first? Please?" Before Ellen could answer, movement at the shelter's entrance caught their attention. A young girl in an oversized hoodie was slipping out the front door, her posture hunched against more than just the cold. Even from a distance, Sophie could see she was crying. "That's her," Ellen breathed, already opening her car door. "Stay here with Lucy." Sophie watched as her mother approached Megan with the same careful movements she used with frightened children at the hospital. Megan froze like a startled deer, one hand clutching the shelter's railing, the other pressed against her abdomen, a reflexive gesture that made Sophie's heart ache. The conversation that followed was too distant for Sophie to hear clearly, but she could read it in their body language, Ellen's open palms, Megan's rigid shoulders gradually softening. The moment when the young girl's composure finally broke and she collapsed into Ellen's arms. Lucy chose that moment to wake fully, her cry piercing the dawn quiet. Sophie saw Megan's head snap up, her whole body seeming to vibrate with recognition. Ellen glanced back at the car, then said something else to Megan, who nodded slowly. Together, they walked toward the car, their feet crunching on fresh snow. Sophie's heart was pounding so hard she could barely breathe. This was the moment when everything could go wrong, or incredibly right. Ellen opened the car's back door, letting in a rush of cold air that made Lucy cry harder. Megan stood frozen, staring at the baby with an expression that Sophie would remember for the rest of her life. Terror and longing and love all mixed together, like watercolors bleeding into each other. "Can I?" Megan's voice cracked. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Can I hold her?" Sophie looked to her mother, who nodded almost imperceptibly. With shaking hands, Sophie unbuckled Lucy from the car seat and carefully passed her to Megan. The moment the baby settled into her mother's arms, her crying stopped, as if she somehow knew she was where she belonged. "I'm sorry," Megan whispered, pressing her face against Lucy's head. "I'm so sorry, baby girl. I was scared. I was so scared." She looked up at Ellen, her eyes swimming with tears. "I didn't know what to do. The baby's father. He wouldn't." She stopped, swallowing hard. "I thought if I left her somewhere safe, someone would find her. Someone better than me." "Someone did find her," Ellen said softly, placing a hand on Megan's shoulder. "But that doesn't mean you're not the someone she needs." Sophie watched as Megan's fingers traced the birthmark on Lucy's shoulder, the same mark that she and her mother shared, a legacy written in skin. "I remember Mom telling me about this mark," Megan said, her voice distant. "She said it meant I was special, that I was loved. But then she was gone and nothing felt special anymore." The sky was lightening rapidly now, the first true rays of sun painting the shelter's windows in shades of gold. A few early birds had begun their morning songs, their calls echoing off the empty streets like promises of a new day. "I know I messed up," Megan continued, gently swaying with Lucy. "I know I can't just fix everything, but I want to try. I want to be better than..." She trailed off, but Sophie could hear the unspoken words. "Better than my mother. Better than my choices. Better than my fears." Ellen took a deep breath, and Sophie recognized the look on her face. It was the same one she wore when making difficult decisions at the hospital, when weighing all the possible outcomes against what her heart told her was right. "Here's what we're going to do," Ellen said, her nurse's voice blending with something warmer, something more maternal. "First, we're all going to the hospital. Lucy needs to be checked out, and so do you, Megan. We'll have to report finding her. That's non-negotiable." "But..." She paused, making sure she had Megan's full attention. "But I'm going to tell them I know you, that I was friends with your mother. I'm going to advocate for you to keep custody, with support and supervision." Megan's eyes widened. "You do that? After what I did?" "What you did was wrong," Ellen said firmly. "But why you did it, that I understand. Sometimes we make desperate choices when we're scared and alone. The important thing is what we do next." "I don't have anywhere to go," Megan whispered. "The shelter's only temporary, and I can't..." "Yes, you do," Ellen interrupted. "You have my house. We have a spare room. It used to be my office, but it gets good morning light. Perfect for a nursery." She glanced at Sophie, whose heart was suddenly too big for her chest. "That is, if Sophie agrees to help me turn it into one." Sophie felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Really? They can stay with us?" Ellen nodded. "It won't be easy. There will be social workers and programs you'll need to attend, Megan. Parenting classes, counseling. You'll need to finish school. But you won't be doing it alone anymore." Lucy made a small cooing sound, and all three of them looked down at her. She was awake now, her dark eyes taking in their faces with that solemn newborn gaze that seemed to hold all the wisdom in the world. "I want to do better," Megan said, her voice stronger now. "For her. For myself. For..." She looked at Ellen. "For Mom. She always said you were the strongest person she knew. That you'd do anything to help someone who needed it." Ellen's composure cracked slightly. "I didn't help her enough. But you're helping me now," Megan said softly. "Maybe that's what matters most." The moment was broken by the sound of another car pulling into the shelter's parking lot. The early shift arriving. Ellen straightened up, her practical nature taking over. "We should go," she said, already thinking ahead to the conversations and explanations that would need to be made at the hospital. "Sophie, can you help Megan get Lucy back in the car seat? I need to make a few calls." As Ellen stepped away to pull out her phone, Sophie watched Megan carefully secure Lucy in the car seat, her movements uncertain but gentle. "I've been calling her Lucy," Sophie admitted. "I hope that's okay." Megan smiled, a small, wavering thing but real. "Lucy," she tested the name. "It's pretty. What made you choose it?" Sophie told her about the wardrobe and the magical world beyond it, about finding something extraordinary in an ordinary place. As she spoke, she realized that maybe that's what they had all found in that alley. Not just a baby, but a chance to heal, to help, to become something more than their past pain. Ellen returned, her face determined. "Dr. Martinez is expecting us in the ER. She's a friend. She'll help make this easier." She looked at all of them, Megan, Lucy, Sophie, and for the first time in years, Sophie saw her mother's smile reach her eyes. "Ready?" They were all quiet as Ellen started the car and pulled out of the parking lot. The sun was fully up now, turning the fresh snow into a blanket of diamonds. Sophie caught Megan's eye and saw her own hope reflected there, hope for Lucy, for themselves, for the family they might become. As they drove toward the hospital, Sophie thought about boxes. The ones we hide things in, the ones we try to fit ourselves into, the ones we sometimes need help climbing out of. She thought about Tommy, and how he would have loved being a sort of uncle to Lucy. Most of all, she thought about how sometimes the biggest acts of love start with the smallest choices, like a girl finding a baby in an alley, or a mother opening her heart to heal not just her own grief, but someone else's too. The morning traffic was beginning to pick up around them, the city coming alive with another day's possibilities. Lucy had drifted back to sleep, one tiny hand clutching Megan's finger through the straps of the car seat. In the rearview mirror, Sophie could see her mother's eyes, clear and focused on the road ahead, no longer haunted by the shadows of the past. They had a long day ahead of them, questions to answer, forms to fill out, explanations to give. But for now, in this moment between night and day, between what was and what could be, they were just four souls brought together by chance and choice, driving toward something that felt a lot like hope. 3 months later, Sophie stood in the doorway of what had once been her mother's home office, watching the early spring sunlight paint patterns on the newly painted mint green walls. The room had transformed completely since that cold January morning when they'd first brought Megan and Lucy home from the hospital. Gone were the filing cabinets and medical reference books, replaced by a white crib that Ellen had retrieved from their neighbor's garage sale, a comfortable rocking chair they'd found on Facebook Marketplace, and cheerful curtains that Megan had sewn herself in her new parenting class. "She's finally asleep," Megan whispered, carefully extracting herself from the rocking chair where Lucy had just drifted off. At 3 months old, Lucy had grown into her features, her dark eyes now unmistakably like her mother's, her tiny fingers constantly reaching out to explore the world around her. The heart-shaped birthmark on her shoulder had become a point of pride rather than painful reminder, a symbol of the family legacy they were all working to reshape. Sophie watched as Megan tucked the blanket around Lucy with practiced care. The past months hadn't been easy. There had been social worker visits, mandatory counseling sessions, late-night feedings, and moments of doubt that had brought them all to tears. But there had also been laughter, small victories, and a growing sense of belonging that made their house feel like a home again. "You're getting really good at that," Sophie observed, noting how Megan had remembered to place Lucy's favorite stuffed rabbit, a gift from Mrs. Henderson, within reach but not too close to her face, just as the parenting book suggested. Megan smiled, the expression more natural now than it had been in those first uncertain weeks. "I had good teachers," she said, glancing at Sophie, "though I still can't believe you managed to take care of her alone for those 3 days. I can barely handle it with all the help I have now." Sophie felt her cheeks warm at the memory. "I was desperate," she admitted, "and scared, and probably a little crazy from grief. Like Mom says," she paused, running her hand along the crib's smooth railing. "But I think maybe we all needed a little crazy back then. Something to shake us out of where we were stuck." From downstairs came the sound of the front door opening, followed by Ellen's voice calling up, "Girls, I'm home, and I brought the paperwork." Sophie and Megan exchanged excited glances before hurrying downstairs, careful to avoid the squeaky step that could wake Lucy. They found Ellen in the kitchen, still in her scrubs, spreading official-looking documents across the counter, while a pot of her famous hot chocolate, a recipe that had become their family ritual for both celebrations and difficult conversations, simmered on the stove. "Well?" Megan asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Did they approve it?" Ellen's face broke into a smile that erased years of worry lines. "They did. The permanent guardianship arrangement has been approved. You and Lucy can stay here as long as you need, with me as your legal guardian until you turn 18. She pulled Megan into a tight hug. "You're stuck with us now, kiddo." Sophie watched as Megan melted into her mother's embrace, remembering how stiff and uncertain such touches had been in the beginning. Now they moved around each other with the easy familiarity of family, their rough edges smoothed by shared experiences and mutual understanding. "There's something else," Ellen said, pulling back to look at both girls. "I've been thinking about Tommy's college fund." She swallowed hard, and Sophie felt her heart skip a beat. They rarely spoke about the money they'd saved for Tommy's future, the dreams that had died with him. "I want to split it between you both. For your education." "Mom," Sophie started, but Ellen held up a hand. "Let me finish. Sophie, you've shown such maturity and compassion these past months. And Megan, your dedication to your GED classes while taking care of Lucy. I'm so proud of both of you. This money was meant to build a future, and that's exactly what it's going to do." Megan shook her head, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "I can't accept that. It's too much." "It's not enough," Ellen corrected gently. "But it's a start. You both deserve the chance to become whatever you want to be." She turned to stir the hot chocolate, her back straight and sure in a way Sophie hadn't seen since before Tommy's illness. Besides, Katie would have done the same for Sophie if our situations were reversed. The mention of Katie no longer brought the same sharp pain it once had. Instead, it felt like acknowledging another member of their unusual family, another thread in the tapestry they were weaving together. "Speaking of education," Sophie said, trying to lighten the moment, "I got an A on my essay about found family." She didn't mention that her teacher had cried while reading it, or that it had led to a class discussion about grief and healing that had left everyone a little more understanding of each other. "Of course you did," Megan laughed, wiping her eyes. "You lived it. We all did." Above them, Lucy's cry echoed through the baby monitor, not distressed, just announcing that her nap was over and she expected company. Before anyone could move, Mrs. Henderson's voice came through as well, singing a soft lullaby. Their elderly neighbor had become an honorary grandmother figure, often slipping over to give Megan breaks or share stories about raising her own children decades ago. "I'll go," Sophie offered, already heading for the stairs. "I want to show Lucy the daffodils that bloomed in the backyard today." As she climbed the stairs, she heard her mother and Megan's voices blend together in the kitchen below, discussing plans for Lucy's upcoming baptism. The sound wrapped around her like a warm blanket, so different from the hollow silence that had filled their house after Tommy died. In the nursery, Mrs. Henderson was already lifting Lucy from her crib, her weathered hands gentle and sure. "Perfect timing," she said, passing the baby to Sophie. "I think someone's ready for an adventure." Sophie carried Lucy to the window, pointing out the bright yellow flowers that had pushed through the last patches of snow in their backyard. "See those, Lucy? They're like you. They found a way to grow even when everything seemed cold and dark." Lucy reached toward the window with one chubby hand, her dark eyes wide with wonder at the colorful world outside. The afternoon sun caught her birthmark, and for a moment, Sophie could see what Katie had meant. It really did look like a heart when the light hit it just right. From downstairs came the sound of laughter, Ellen and Megan probably sharing another of their increasingly frequent jokes. Mrs. Henderson hummed contentedly as she straightened Lucy's blankets, and somewhere in the distance, a bird sang out a welcome to spring. Sophie held Lucy closer, breathing in her sweet baby scent. She thought about the box in the alley, about desperate choices and second chances, about how family isn't always what we're born into, but sometimes what we build together from the broken pieces of our hearts. "You know what, Lucy?" she whispered. "I think we all found exactly what we needed that night. We just didn't know it yet." Lucy responded with a happy gurgle, reaching up to pat Sophie's cheek with a tiny hand that seemed to promise that everything, somehow, was exactly as it should be. And in that moment, surrounded by the family they had pieced together from love and chance and choice, Sophie knew it was true.